They mocked his rusted blade. Then he drew it, and the stars themselves went quiet. The war was supposed to have ended centuries ago. The conclave of stars had signed their treaties, drawn their borders, and buried their dead. But peace was always a thin lie in the galaxy. Beneath the gilded halls of empires, new rivalry simmered. New weapons were forged. New soldiers were raised. Yet not all soldiers stayed new. Some grew old, forgotten, discarded by history. And some, like Kalandre, carried relics that belonged to a time when the galaxy trembled. Kalen walked into the Hall of Valor with a blade strapped across his back. Not a plasma saber, not a graviton lance, not one of the new quantum-forged marvels. No, his weapon was iron, rusted, pitted, ancient. The kind of thing you might find in a ruin, not a battlefield. The gathered lords, warriors, and mercenaries turned to look at him, and then, inevitably, to laugh. Beginning the mockery. The Hall of Valor was filled with champions of every starfaring species. A Yarathi warlord with plated skin that could deflect artillery. A Dravari duelist whose twin plasma blades sang like lightning. A dozen others, each armed with weapons more advanced than entire human colonies could afford. And then there was Kalen. Human. Weathered. His armor dented, patched dull. His blade, a simple sword that looked like it belonged in a museum. The laughter was cruel, echoing through the hall's vaulted ceiling. He brought scrap metal. Does he plan to fight or to polish relics? I've seen mining tools with more edge. Kalen didn't flinch. He lowered himself onto one knee before the dais, where the Council of Commanders sat in judgment. They sought warriors for the Black Rift campaign, a war against an enemy that had risen in the void beyond known stars. The Rift's spawn were unlike anything before, shadows that devoured light, claws that tore through hulls, voices that drove soldiers mad. The galaxy's finest warriors had gathered to prove themselves worthy. Kalen bowed his head. I seek a place in the campaign. The Yarathi warlord sneered. With that, a rusted blade. The Dravari duelist smirked. He'll be dead before the first skirmish. Even the counselors exchanged doubtful glances. But Kalen simply stood, placed a hand on the worn hilt, and smiled faintly. This blade has drunk more blood than all your armies combined. You may mock it, but it remembers what the stars have forgotten. The hall erupted in jeers. Only one counselor, an aged Varen seer with pale silver eyes, tilted her head. Perhaps we should let him demonstrate. The trial. The council decreed a test. Kalen would face one of the Rift spawn prisoners, a creature captured at great cost. If he survived, he would earn his place. If he died, the hall would laugh over his grave. The chamber was prepared. A void shield hummed to life, keeping the monster contained. The Rift spawn emerged, a writhing shape of shadow and teeth, its body both solid and insubstantial, as if reality itself couldn't decide what it was. The crowd leaned forward eagerly. Kalen stepped into the chamber. His armor groaned. His boots dragged slightly. He looked every bit the relic he carried. The Rift spawn struck first. A blur of claws, a shriek that made the air vibrate. Kalen staggered back, the crowd laughing, until he drew the blade. The hall fell silent. Because the moment iron cleared its sheath, the Rift spawn froze. Its claws halted mid-strike. Its shriek died into a hiss of pain. And for the first time since its capture, the shadow creature retreated. The rusted blade gleamed faintly, not with technology, but with something older, something primal. The edges glowed, as if remembering suns long dead. Kalen lunged. His strike was not fast, not elegant, but when the blade cut through the Rift spawn's body, the impossible happened. The shadow screamed, and then it bled light. The audience gasped. Plasma blades, particle cannons, graviton lances. None of them had drawn true blood from the rift's spawn. But Kalen's rusted sword had. 3 strikes later, the creature collapsed, dissolving into ash. Kalen lowered the blade, breathing heavy but steady. The silence of the hall was absolute. The revelation, a weapon from before. The Varanseer rose, voice trembling. That is no rusted relic. That is an Eclipser blade. Forged in the Wars of Origin, when the first civilizations fought the Rift spawn at the dawn of stars. Weapons made not of matter alone, but of memory. Bound to blood, to history, to will. Every swing carries the echo of those who wielded it before. Whispers spread like fire. The Wars of Origin were myths, stories told to frighten children. Yet here was proof, gleaming in Kalen's hands. The Yarathi warlord's sneer faded. The Dravari duelist's smirk was gone. Kalen slid the blade back into its sheath. The rust returned, the glow fading, as though it had gone to sleep. He looked up at the council. I told you. It remembers. The campaign. Into the Black Rift. Kalen was no longer mocked. When the Black Rift campaign began, he marched at the front, not as a relic, but as a champion. Warriors who once jeered now followed him, not because of his strength, but because they had seen what his weapon could do. The Rift spawn came in swarms, shrieking things that bent light and tore reality. Plasma and quantum fire cut many down, but it was Kalen's blade that struck fear into them. Where he walked, shadows recoiled. Where he swung, monsters bled light. But the blade demanded a cost. Each battle drained him. The sword's power was not endless. It drew from Kalen's own life, binding his will to every strike. With each victory, his body grew weaker, his hair grayer, his bones heavier. And yet he laughed. For the first time in centuries, the galaxy had a weapon that could turn the tide. Climax. The final silence. The campaign reached the heart of the rift, a vast wound in space where stars had been devoured. At its core waited a colossal rift spawn, a being older than empires, vast as a moon. The fleets faltered. The warriors despaired. Even the counselors hesitated. Kalen stepped forward, blade on his back. His voice was steady. It ends with me. The giant rift spawn surged, a storm of claws and shadow. Kalen drew the blade one final time. The stars themselves seemed to hold their breath. The blade sang, not with technology, but with memory. With every strike of every warrior who had ever wielded it. Kalen's body burned, his veins seared with fire, but he did not stop. He swung until the shadows screamed, until the galaxy shook, until at last the great rift spawn fell, split by a weapon thought lost to legend. As silence spread across the void, the stars themselves seemed to bow. Ending the legacy of rust. Kalen never returned from the rift. When the fleets limped home, the council erected a statue in his honor. A warrior, bent but unbroken, holding a sword that seemed too simple, too rusted, too ordinary, until you remembered what it had done. Legends spread. Some claimed Kalen still lived, wandering the edge of space with his blade, hunting the last of the rift spawn. Others said the sword had claimed him, carrying him into memory as it had all its wielders. But in the Hall of Valor, where once they had mocked him, no one laughed at rusted blades anymore, because they all remembered the moment he drew it, and the stars themselves went quiet.